You must be picky and make sure you're drinking first quality
Yeah,
food.
always. And always when I open a packaging, always I smell, I look the color, the flavor. You put the rules in your mind and you're gonna say, oh, the notes are different to the coffee I drank the last week.
Yes.
You're gonna like compare every
Yes.
single cup you drink.
From Frequency Media, this is Globocurious, an immersive travel podcast about the magic of curiosity, discovery, and human connection. I'm Michelle Corey, and this week we're headed to Colombia's coffee axis, or Eje Cafetero. Ah, coffee. Believe it or not, I've been drinking coffee since I was 4 years old. It may as well be coursing through my blood. In fact, the family lore is that our ancestors were some of the first to cultivate the precious Turkish beans in Colombia. Here, coffee is more than just a drink. It's a cultural pillar. It's a symbol of economic value and a driver of global tourism. And in the country that is the third largest producer of coffee in the world, there's one region in particular where coffee reigns supreme: the Colombian coffee axis. The journey from Medellin to Pereira entails the kind of puddle-jumping flight where the passengers meet the planes on the tarmac. The arrival in Pereira is marked by lush rolling hills signature to this region that make an immediate and eye-catching appearance. If you listened to the last episode, you know how my tour-filled days in Medellin had turned into a weekend of family-filled events, after which my immediate family and I had planned to spend a few days rediscovering the Eje Cafetero, which we had first visited decades ago when I was just a child. We rented a car, which is the best transportation option for this sprawled out area peppered with tiny towns and farmlands, and set out to our first stop, the famously multicolored town of Filandia. The car turned down a curved street wrapped in a vivid mural, and suddenly, Filandia was laid out before us like a box of crayons scattered across a cobblestone carpet. Every building seemed to shout its own unique color combo: fiery red with Caribbean teal, deep blue with baby pink, sunshine yellow and magenta, all framed by the sparkling greens of the surrounding hills. The streets are lined with artisan shops overflowing with handmade treasures, and the air is filled with the aroma of freshly baked pan de yucas. Locals gather in the plaza, chatting and laughing in the small locales that line the square, while tourists wander, phones lifted to capture every detail. It was in this atmosphere of relaxed charm that we discovered La Remesa. Tucked away on a quiet side street, this restaurant is an oasis. We ordered from a menu filled with modern, creative twists of Colombian classics, and were floored when we took our first bites. Exquisite food, a beautiful setting, and undeniable Instagram appeal. Was I in heaven? It offered an interesting contrast to Guatapé, which we visited in the last episode. Here in Filandia, it seemed like tourism was working in harmony with the local community, bringing in new opportunities without sacrificing authenticity or affordability. We checked into our charming Airbnb, a 3-story townhouse on the edge of town with a hot tub on the 3rd floor terrace and sweeping views. Filandia felt instantly like home. Don't get me wrong, we clearly didn't look like locals. In fact, I'm often stared at like I'm an alien in small Colombian towns because of my pale skin, green eyes, and 5'10" stature. But even so, when I visited the arepa stand by the house the next morning, I felt very much a part of the routines of the village. With a hearty breakfast of cheesy arepas and local eggs fueling us, we set off on our first excursion, a visit to the legendary Valle de Cocora. Imagine a vast valley carpeted in emerald green, with towering wax palm trees reaching for the sky like giant feathers. That is Cocora, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These palms, the tallest in the world, are a truly awe-inspiring sight, and walking among them felt like stepping into a fantasy novel. A fine mist coated the air as we trekked through the shortest hike in the park, a somewhat rocky and slightly inclined 1-mile path that leads to an area called Bosque de Palmas, where the trees are the densest. The path was shockingly clear of other people, something we guessed was due to the weekday visit during the winter. The lack of tourists meant we were left with a soothing soundtrack composed of rustling leaves, birdsong, and our own huffing and puffing. See, the air here is crisp and clean and thin. The altitude where we were is around 2,000 meters or 6,600 feet, meaning we, as low-altitude dwellers, could feel our lungs working overtime to snatch every bit of oxygen out of the misty air. After our hike, we headed to the charming town of Salento with its colorful houses and lively square. Our growling stomachs led us to Donde Laurita, a quirky restaurant whose interiors are a visual feast. Every inch of the walls and ceiling was covered in an astounding jumble of objects. Tube TVs, vintage radios, old coffee grinders, colorful wind chimes, and even a collection of old VCRs. It was like dining inside a museum of eclectic Colombian oddities. We ducked under a chandelier made of wooden parrots to reach our table, and as I looked through the menu, I found something fishy. Literally, line after line of trout dishes. Not what I'd call typical Colombian food by any stretch of the imagination. When our server Felipe came over, it was like a scene straight out of Forrest Gump.
Trout macanas, grilled trout, garlic grilled trout, trout gratin with mushrooms, seafood trout, and almond-crusted trout.
By then, my cousin had joined us for lunch. He lives in Armenia, a city about 40 minutes away from Salento, so I was hoping he could give me some answers. I asked him, dumbfounded, what is with the trout?
Let's go, chump.
Trout in Canada is used as a scavenger fish, and here in Colombia it was brought over because of the cold climate.
As it turns out, the Colombian government imported rainbow trout from North America in the 1930s and 40s to diversify its food sources and promote aquaculture. They built hatcheries and stocked rivers and lakes, and the trout thrived in the region's cool, high-altitude waters, which is how this species from a different hemisphere became so integrated into the local cuisine. Huh. This was one of those surprises you only get when you travel. A moment of curiosity that confronts you unexpectedly and dares you to explore it more deeply. I ordered the baked trout smothered in mushrooms and cheese with an even deeper appreciation for how this fish is part of a larger story about Colombia's relationship with nature and global economics. Welcome to my world, where a plate of trout sparks a deep dive into globalization. As we left the restaurant and stepped into the main square of Salento, we were greeted by a lively night scene. Cafe tables spilled onto the sidewalks where the animated chatter of locals mingled with the languages of German, Swedish, and American tourists. We wove in and out of the shops, including a 2-story building brimming with local artisanal jewelry and food shops. My mom, whose raging sweet tooth practically has its own radar, stopped a local to ask for directions to the nearest ice cream shop. Within minutes, we found it, Tentaciones Salentinas, and my eyes grew wide. Because while they did have quite a selection of ice cream and paletas, their menu also prominently featured merengón.
¿Tienen merengón?
Tengo con habanón o merengón. O merengón. En el momento tengo de café, de guanábana.
Merengón is a traditional Colombian dessert, basically a cross between a trifle and a pavlova, thanks to its layers of meringue, fresh fruit, and cream. The meringue is crisp, the fruit is tangy, and the cream is rich. See, I don't usually crave sweets, but when I'm in Colombia, my dormant little sweet tooth awakens with a beastly demand for one thing and one thing alone: merengón. Covered in peaches, strawberries, and guanábana.
Oh, yeah.
Ugh, now I'm craving it. We all dug into our sweet treats while talking to locals and enjoying the town's atmosphere. Here in Salento, tourism seems to be a harmonious force. The influx of visitors, drawn by the allure of Cocora Valley, could easily overwhelm its quaint character. But Salento appears to be navigating that challenge with a conscious effort to ensure tourism benefits the community as a whole. Local businesses, like Tentaciones Salentinas, thrive while offering authentic experiences and goods. The streets remain clean, the buildings retain their historic character, and the locals exude a genuine warmth. Salento feels like a town that's embracing its popularity without sacrificing its identity. It's a place where tourists and locals happily coexist, sharing in the beauty and tranquility of this special corner of the coffee axis. Maintaining the harmony between the economic needs of a country and those of its people is a balancing act that's notoriously hard to achieve. And nowhere is that more obvious than with agricultural trade, something we learned the next day during our visit to RECUCA, short for Recorrido de la Cultura Cafetera, or Tour of the Coffee Culture, a park founded 18 years ago with the goal of immersing people in Colombia's coffee-based cultural heritage. We drove along the region's famously winding roads where diamond-shaped yellow signs alert drivers of the bustling population of animals that may cross their paths. These silhouettes became a guessing game for my family as we'd shout, "Monkey! Snake! Armadillo!" and then debate heatedly about the shapes we couldn't quite make out. A rat? No, that's too big to be a rat. We laughed as we drove through the dense rolling hills, each new sign a reminder that, like Dorothy, we were certainly not in Kansas anymore. Tucked into the Andes Mountains in central Colombia, the Eje Cafetero encompasses 4 departments, or states, where biodiversity abounds. It's a region whose high-altitude humidity yields some of the world's most sought-after resources, including coffee, avocados, bananas, and emeralds. With towering palms and colorful towns already under our belts, this day was going to be dedicated to Colombia's fascinating cultural, economic, and societal relationship with coffee.
That's why the coffee here is so good, because of the tropical climate and the altitude.
That's Kennedy, one of the guides at RECUCA. Even in casual conversation, he couldn't help but share what makes Colombian coffee so special. RECUCA is all about bringing that story to life, blending Colombia's rich coffee-growing traditions with humor and hands-on experiences. But what truly made the visit unforgettable was our dedicated guide Juan Pablo, or Juanpa for short. With his infectious energy, he turned our tour into a game of coffee trivia. So, I hope you've had your caffeine today, because you're about to join us for Cafecurious, the only game show where your coffee buzz gets its own buzzer. Straight from Colombia's coffee axis, our special guest is the one and only Juanpa. Let's jump right in with the first question.
Where do you think that the coffee comes from?
Colombia.
Ethiopia.
Oh, Ethiopia! Let's clap it up, Ethiopia.
If you buzzed in with Ethiopia, you're absolutely right. And your prize? You get to hear the legendary tale of how coffee was discovered.
This man was walking a long time ago in a really sunny day and he decided to rest under shade. After that, he woke up and he saw his ghost eating some little beans. He decided to try those beans and he put those beans in a boil with water. When it boiled, he drank it and he tasted that flavor.
Which leads us to our next question.
What was the flavor of that beverage?
Coffee.
No, not coffee, was bitter, disgusting. And then he was anger for that. He kicked the boil, the little beans started contact with fire and the area was smelling amazing. And that's how he discovered that the coffee was not for boiling, was for roasting, there you go.
It looks like the world owes its love of roasted coffee to an angry goat herder who kicked a bowl of bitter beans into a fire. We've all been there, am I right? Now on to question 3.
Which are the countries that drink coffee the most? What do you think?
The U.S.
US,
South Korea.
South Korea,
Europe,
France, Italy, Spain. So I'm gonna show you this. Scandinavian countries, the consumption is between 12 or 13 kilograms per person per year.
That's so much coffee, their saunas must smell like espresso. No? No one? Okay, well anyway. Our last question may just be the final nail in the coffin.
In which state we drink coffee the most?
Bogota.
No, funerals. Because it's free.
Really?
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
It looks like Juanpa likes his humor as dark as he likes his coffee. And that's it for today's round of Cafecurious. Thanks for playing. With every new fact we learned on the tour, we were reminded of how deeply coffee is woven into the everyday lives of Colombians. But to fully understand Colombia's coffee story, we have to look at its place in the global market.
Talking about producers, Brazil is located in the first place, Vietnam second place, third place Colombia. Because our size, we cannot have a comparison with this big and this big country.
That's producers.
And our coffee is because our species, Arabico, is the smoothest coffee around the world. That's why we are known because of our quality, not because of our quantity, okay?
And yet, Colombia produces only about 10% of the world's Arabica coffee. That's what makes Colombian coffee a global treasure. But here's where the story gets bittersweet.
Here in Colombia, we reach maximum 2 kilograms per person per year. This is because we export a lot of first quality coffee, and the other quality is for us that is called pasilla. Pasilla is like the quality in which we are gonna have a lot of imperfections, like overripe grains that were burned by the sun. That's why we export a lot of first quality coffee, and the other quality is for us.
While the world sips Colombia's finest, most Colombians never get a taste. The top-tier beans are exported, leaving the lower-quality pasilla beans for local consumption. It's a reflection of a much larger reality.
It's like they should transition now that there's a lot of tourism, keep some here so people come to Colombia to drink good coffee.
Even if they did that, they're never going to get the price they could get from export. So it's better to just keep the marketing strong about Colombian coffee so people can expect it, but don't get it here.
Yeah, that's a really sad part, but
it is.
We need to, to keep well the economy.
Resource-rich countries like Colombia often find themselves playing the role of supplier in the global economy. Their best resources are exported for profit, leaving them to make do with what remains. It's a pattern seen in countless industries, from agriculture to mining. An economy built on tourism is an entirely different story, though. It comes with its complexities for sure, but it also offers significant quality of life improvements for swaths of the population who aren't cut out for the backbreaking work of harvesting those natural resources.
For me, it's really difficult and sad to know that the payment is per kilogram that they collect. And you can pick like 80 kilograms. And the payment is between 500 maximum 1,000 Colombian pesos. Per kilo.
That's 12 to 24 US cents per 2 pounds, which means if they collect 80 kilos, they're making $18 maximum for that day's work. And the work itself is nothing short of treacherous. We already know Colombia's steep, rugged mountainsides create the perfect conditions for coffee to thrive. But these same conditions also create a dangerous environment for the harvesters. Imagine being one of these workers, ascending steep, muddy slopes, a basket tied to your waist, your hands coarse from hours of picking, every pluck of berries made even more precarious by the ever-present risk of venomous spiders, snakes, and scorpions hiding among the thick vegetation. So not only is the work incredibly strenuous physically, it's dangerous because of the incline and the animals.
The hill, the animals.
And they barely get paid for it.
And with all this rain, the hills are very...
They cannot stop. They cannot stop. They're gonna put a plastic bag and they're gonna keep going.
These mountains, bursting with life, are a double-edged sword for the people who depend on the land for their livelihood. And this is the harsh reality for so many countries whose economies rely so heavily on the export of their natural resources. It's the kind of work that only very few, very brave people are willing or even able to take on. But that's where tourism can play its part. While tourism can and does cause harm in many places, here in the Eje Cafetero, it felt noticeably different. It wasn't about simply extracting from the land or its people. It felt more like a genuine supplement to the local economy. Like the community itself is actively involved in shaping how visitors engage with their culture and contribute to their livelihoods. Is there a river there? Because I can hear it.
Can you hear it better using that?
I can. Do you want to listen?
Sure. Wow, the veil has been lifted from my eyes. Technology is amazing. No wonder you've been so focused. It can all be heard right there. Wow, that's so cool.
As I reveled in the region's fetching towns, drank in its coffee culture, and bathed in its forests, I was reminded of the importance of engaging with a destination on its own terms. Here, tourism feels like a celebration of culture and community, a way to connect with the heart of a place rather than simply take from it. And that's what makes this region unforgettable. The sense of being welcomed into something real and rooted. Because ultimately, what you take away from a place like the Coffee Axis isn't just its breathtaking landscapes or its endearing towns. It's the richness of its culture, the intentionality behind its resources, the traditions woven into its coffee harvests. It's the way this region showcases the incredible biodiversity and ingenuity that make Colombia one of the most extraordinary places on Earth. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Colombia's coffee axis. On the next episode of Globocurious, we head about as far north up the east coast of the US as you can get to visit my sister-in-law's childhood roots in Skinny Atlas, New York. We'll learn about the salty history of the Finger Lakes, experience all-American lake life, and walk in Harriet Tubman's shoes. Until next time, stay curious. Globocurious is an original production of Frequency Media. I'm Michelle Corey, the host, writer, and executive producer. Lizzie Stewart is our producer. Claire Bidigary Curtis is our sound designer and mixer. Jessica Olivier is our creative consultant and script editor. Special thanks to Juanpa, Kennedy, Felipe, Santiago, and my family for allowing me to capture our experiences.
Tranquila, comadre, que el carro le va a quedar cuidado por cámara y satélite, ¿listo? Él es cámara y yo soy satélite, mucho gusto. Sí, sí. Es más, por 5.000 pesos se le entrega lavado y polichado, mejor dicho, como dicen por ahí, más barato que gallina robada.